All right, the AP Top 25 poll is out, and Georgia remains #1 in the latest poll. The Bulldogs muddled their way to a 7-point road win over Auburn on Saturday to win their 22nd game in a row. Meanwhile, Michigan made up some ground, picking up an additional 11 first-place votes. You got #3 Texas also adding some love to them after their 40-14 win over previously unbeaten Kansas. A little further down, you see Oregon there leapfrogging USC in a battle of Pac-12 powers. Notre Dame, their nail-biting win over Duke gets them back into the top 10 there with a 5-1 record. As you take a look 11 through 20, you see a handful of teams making their way up. A few teams were idle, like a Washington State. But Utah, one of the big fallers there, 8 spots down from 10 to 18. It'll be interesting to see what our college football analyst has to say about Utah and Kyle Whittingham's program. You see Kentucky there coming in at 20. They get in there because they took care of previously ranked Florida at home. So the Wildcats and Mark Stoops' team gets into the top 25. LSU, a big faller after their shootout with Ole Miss, and Jeff Tedford continues to ball out with his Fresno State Bulldogs. They win and they go up 1 spot to 24. All right, let's bring in our college football analyst, Bryant McFadden, to break down the latest AP Top 25. And B-Mac, let's start with that game. That was another nail-biter there between the Fighting Irish and the Blue Devils. What's your big takeaway, not only how Notre Dame bounced back from that loss to Ohio State, just sort of your thoughts overall?
My biggest takeaway from seeing the Fighting Irish bounce back, get a big-time win against the Blue Devils, is that their defense is legit. Their defense, when you look at what they did in the first half of play, you know, Sam Hartman wasn't at his best last night, but their defense carried the team until the offense came to the party. They did not allow 1 point in the first half, played against a very mobile quarterback in Riley Leonard, made life miserable for him, even though he ran for over 80 yards on the ground. When he was throwing the football, especially in the first half, he had no opportunity because they were collapsing the pocket, play in and play out. So I love what they're doing with their defense, and we know the experience that Sam Hartman has at his disposal. Even though he wasn't at his best last night against the Blue Devils, we know this is a guy that can play big-time football and put up big-time numbers for that Fighting Irish offense. So just seeing them bounce back, most people might not look at the Blue Devils this year as a competitor, but they can play football, especially there at home. Coach Elko's doing a phenomenal job with their defense for some of the transfers they got into that program. But they battled against a better team last night, and they showed from start to finish against the Fighting Irish.
21-14. By the way, Notre Dame was favored by 5.5. They needed just the field goal. They get the touchdown and the 2-point conversion to cover. And you mentioned Riley Leonard. He is a fantastic player, seen on crutches after that last play of the game. We certainly hope that his leg is okay and that he'll be able to continue a good season for the Dukies. Let's get to the fallout from LSU and Ole Miss, where, you know, we talk about that team that lost to Florida State naturally, but even with the shootout to Ole Miss, they dropped a lot, down 8 spots to nearly outside of the top 25. Do you think that was warranted, B-Mac, or what did you think about LSU? Let's start with them first.
Yeah, I think it's warranted in seeing the significant drop with the Tigers in the poll. And the reason why is because their defense didn't show up at any given time last night against the Rebels. If I didn't know any better, I thought I was watching the Big 12 matchup. No slight to the Big 12, but let's keep it real. The last few years, that has been known to be the conference that does not play defense. And LSU last night, even though Jaden Daniels put up video game-like numbers, they just couldn't get any stops against the Rebels. Either they were running the football well against the Tigers defensively, or they just were hitting open pass catchers in coverage. And the most disturbing thing that I saw with LSU, just the inability to tackle. Just the missed tackles. I mean, play in and play out. Anytime you saw a big game for the Rebels, it had to do with missed opportunities in regards to a defender getting a Rebel offensive player down. That's just bad football. And we say the Tigers have a lot of talent. You can't knock that because we've seen how well they've been able to recruit, not to mention some of the transfers they got into the program. But what we saw last night was a disappointment display on the defensive side. And in totality, both offenses combined for over 1,300 yards, Tommy. 1,300 yards. Both offenses were unstoppable. When you talk about seeing the rise with the Rebels in the polls and seeing the drop in the Tigers in the poll, is well deserved.
Let's quickly talk about Lane Kiffin's team. They bounced back from that loss to Bama here. How high are you on the Rebels potentially being a contender in conference?
That's the thing about the Rebels. They're a different team at home than on the road. And when you talk about being a divisional competitor in the division in the West, you got to find a way to take your home show on the road. Last week, we didn't see the same offensive production that we saw last night against the Tigers when they visited Alabama. And that's the issue. That's the most inconsistent thing that I'm seeing with the Rebels in regards to their offensive production is they're night and day when they're at home compared to when they're traveling on the road. But anything can happen because they have an experienced quarterback. They have a play caller in Lane Kiffin that can definitely dial up some heat. He's extremely aggressive. So they can put points on the scoreboard if they can get things rolling like we saw last night against the LSU Tigers.
So I'm curious to also get your thoughts from the Utah-Oregon State game. Utah also moving back significantly from 10 to 18. Again, they're still without Cam Rising. What do you think about the Utes as it stands today?
Unfortunately for the Utes, the injury bug is really hurting their chances. One thing we know about the Utes in years past, and even this year, they've always been a consistent, strong, legit competitor. But right now, not having their #1 quarterback, a guy in Cam Rising who's been playing football, college football for quite some time with the experience and understanding their offense, we haven't seen the consistency. They took a big one on the chin yesterday against Oregon State. DJU played pretty good football, but I'm loving what I'm seeing from their defense as well. They made life miserable for Nate Johnson. He was inefficient, couldn't get things going, throwing the football or running the football, and that's an issue. I mean, Oregon State defense only allowed running from the Utes 1.8 yards per carry. Not even 2 yards they allowed when the Utes was running the football. That's outstanding play, and a lot of that had to do with the scheme, knowing that Nate Johnson is not the passer that Cam Rising is. So unfortunately for the Utes, you look at that Pac-12, we can't laugh at the Pac-12 anymore because they're the most competitive conference in Power 5 play when it comes to in totality with the quality of teams they have, and they're going to continue to see elite-like play in the Pac-12. If they don't get Cam Rising back sooner than later, it could get real difficult for them.
You know, it's interesting. I wonder if they'll get some type of relief because of Cam Rising, and maybe not, because you still have Washington, Oregon, and USC all in the top 10, and Utah was there until they lost. Continuing to talk to your point about the strength of the Pac-12 right now, where do you stand in terms of how top-heavy they are and the chance that they could also get to the CFP?
Man, like I said, Tommy, I think they're the best conference in college football right now. They have the best quarterbacks in college football right now. They have some of the best offenses in college football right now. So in regards to asking the question, will we see a representative from the Pac-12 in the college football playoffs? No doubt about it. And even if that representative has one loss, I'm okay in seeing that. Because in what we're seeing right now from the name programs that we talk about week in and week out, you talk about Washington with Michael Penix, you talk about USC with Caleb. I mean, you got to throw Washington State in the mix as well. You can throw Oregon State into the mix. I mean, there's so many teams I'm missing. They're just loaded. I think currently they have 6 teams ranked in the top 25. 6 teams, and all 6 teams can go. All 6 teams can score, even though the Utes, they're missing their starting quarterback. So yes, I think for sure we will see a representative get into the college football playoffs with one loss. Even with one loss, but I know for sure we will see a Pac-12 team get into the playoffs. That's what I'm saying. All
right, get you out of here on this as we look ahead to next week. I'm seeing LSU Mizzou ranked matchup. We got Oklahoma and Texas, of course. And then we have Florida State, which would be a big favorite over Virginia Tech. What are you looking out for this week on the gridiron?
Another outstanding week coming up. When you talk about Oklahoma and Texas, how real is Oklahoma, Tommy, right? Dylan Gabriel, unbelievable night last night, 3 touchdowns, over 360 yards passing. But if you look at their schedule, I mean, they haven't really been tested. They've taken care of the teams they're supposed to take care of. But how real is the Sooners? We will see going against Quinn Ewers and the job he's been able to do, a very impressive record so far. When you look at beating Kansas, even though they didn't have their starting quarterback yesterday, they still put up 40 points against their defense. And then, of course, a few weeks ago, going on the road, taking care of their business against Alabama. So I'm definitely looking at that Big 12 matchup, man. I think it's going to be a star-studded event with 2 elite-like quarterbacks playing at a high level. But like I said, you can kind of close your eyes, Tommy, and depending on who you're rooting for, if you don't have a dog in the race, you can kind of pick a matchup and walk away extremely satisfied with the display of football that you will see.
Yeah, no doubt. It's been fun so far, and we've been loving every single week in the college game. Our thanks to Bryant McFadden. B-Mac, certainly appreciate it. Good catching up with you.